Ma'am, with your permission, I'd like to follow you somewhere we can talk without an audience. I looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, civilians with cell phones recording what they thought was police harassment but was actually something much more complicated. The last thing I needed was video of this conversation ending up on social media, where it might reach people who had very specific reasons for wanting to know where General Elena Patterson had disappeared to. "There's a coffee shop 2 blocks east of here," I said. "Quiet, good sight lines, easy exit routes." Coleman's eyebrows rose slightly at my automatic tactical assessment, but he nodded. "We'll follow you there." "And General?" He paused until I met his eyes. "For what it's worth, it's an honor." I climbed back into my Honda, hands shaking slightly as I started the engine. In the space of 15 minutes, everything I'd built over the past 8 years had crumbled around me. Sarah Mitchell, suburban mom with money troubles and a beat-up car, was gone. In her place sat General Elena Patterson, a woman with secrets that governments killed to protect, and enemies who never forgot. As I pulled out of the parking lot with 3 police cars following at a respectful distance, I thought about Emma, probably sitting in her first period class completely unaware that her mother's carefully constructed double life had just imploded. Whatever came next, whatever questions Coleman wanted answered, my daughter's safety came first. Because General Patterson had made a lot of enemies during her career, and some of them had very long memories. The coffee shop was exactly what I'd expected. A small local place with mismatched furniture and the kind of laid-back atmosphere that made serious conversations possible. I chose a table in the back corner with clear sightlines to both entrances and sat with my back to the wall, old habits asserting themselves as naturally as breathing. Coleman entered alone, leaving his officers outside in what appeared to be casual positions, but was actually a security perimeter. He ordered 2 coffees and approached my table with the careful respect of someone who understood military hierarchy, even in civilian clothes. "General Patterson," he said, setting a cup in front of me before taking the seat across the table. "Permission to speak freely?" I almost smiled at the formal protocol. "Granted, Sergeant. And it's just Sarah now. Has been for 8 years. Ma'am, with respect, there's no such thing as just Sarah when you're talking about the woman who planned the extraction from Kandahar, led the strike team in Somalia, and single-handedly prevented what the intelligence reports called a significant terrorist incident in 3 different countries." He leaned forward, his voice dropping to ensure privacy. "You disappeared from official records 8 years ago, right after your husband was killed in that convoy attack. Word was you'd suffered a breakdown, took early retirement for medical reasons." The coffee burned bitter in my throat as I forced myself to meet his eyes. "That's the official story, yes. But that's not the whole truth, is it?" Coleman's voice was gentle, but his eyes were sharp with the kind of intelligence that had probably kept him alive in whatever conflicts had earned him those ribbons. "Because General Elena Patterson doesn't have breakdowns. She has contingency plans." I stared into my coffee cup, seeing reflections of choices I'd made and prices I'd paid. "What do you want, Sergeant?" "Honestly, I want to know why one of the most decorated special operations commanders in modern military history is working retail and driving a car that should have been scrapped during the Bush administration." He paused, studying my face. "And I want to know if you're in some kind of trouble that might affect the safety of this community." The question was fair, and I respected him for asking it directly. Coleman struck me as the kind of NCO who'd earned his stripes by being smart enough to ask the right questions and tough enough to handle the answers. "I'm not in trouble," I said carefully, "but there are people who might consider my continued existence inconvenient." "What kind of people?" "The kind who don't like loose ends. The kind who prefer their secrets buried with the people who keep them." I met his eyes, letting him see just enough of the truth to understand the stakes. "My husband's death wasn't random, Sergeant. Someone wanted him gone, and when that didn't achieve the desired result, they decided his widow might be a problem too." Coleman's expression hardened. "You're talking about action against a United States general officer. I'm talking about the kind of gray area operations where rank doesn't matter as much as what you know and who you might tell." I took a sip of coffee, buying time to decide how much truth was safe to share. "I know things, Sergeant. Things that certain people in certain positions would prefer remained classified permanently. So you disappeared. I became someone else, someone ordinary, unremarkable, the kind of person who blends into suburban normalcy without leaving ripples. I gestured toward the window where my Honda sat like a testament to careful mediocrity. Sarah Mitchell is everything Elena Patterson wasn't. Visible, but invisible. Present, but unimportant. Coleman was quiet for a long moment, processing implications that went far beyond local law enforcement jurisdiction. "Your daughter," he said finally. "She doesn't know. She knows I served. She doesn't know what I did, or why we really moved here." The thought of Emma discovering the truth in some uncontrolled way made my chest tight with anxiety. "She's 13, Sergeant. She deserves to grow up thinking the world is a place where people like her mother drive buses and work in department stores, not a place where they plan operations that never officially happened." "But someone's found you." I nodded, thinking about the man from yesterday, his careful questions and knowing eyes. "Maybe. Or maybe I'm just paranoid after 8 years of looking over my shoulder." Coleman leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. "General, with your permission, I'd like to run this up my chain of command. Not to expose you," he added quickly, seeing my expression, "but to verify that you're not currently wanted or under investigation. And maybe to put some unofficial protection in place." "I don't need protection, Sergeant. With respect, ma'am, you're driving a car that probably won't survive another Virginia winter, working retail for what I'm guessing is barely above minimum wage, and living under an identity that just got blown in a routine traffic stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "Maybe you don't need protection, but you might benefit from some official cover. And your daughter definitely deserves to know that if something happens to you, there are people who understand what you sacrificed and why." I studied his face, looking for any sign of deception or hidden agenda. What I saw was a career NCO who understood duty and sacrifice, someone who'd probably made his own difficult choices in service to country and community. The kind of soldier I'd been proud to serve alongside when I wore the uniform. "What are you proposing?" "Let me make some calls. Verify your status. Maybe arrange for some unofficial monitoring of your situation. In return, you tell me if you notice anything that suggests your cover has been compromised beyond today's traffic stop." He paused. "And maybe consider that hiding isn't the same as living, especially when you have a daughter who's going to start asking harder questions as she gets older." The weight of 8 years pressed down on my shoulders like a physical burden. I'd gotten good at being Sarah Mitchell, had almost convinced myself that the transformation was complete. But sitting here, talking to someone who understood the world I'd left behind, I felt the familiar stirring of something I'd thought was dead and buried. "I need to pick up my daughter from school in 6 hours, I said finally. "Whatever calls you're going to make, whatever official attention this is going to draw, I need to know that she's safe." "You have my word, General. Whatever else happens, your daughter's safety is the priority." I nodded, recognizing the sincerity in his voice. "Make your calls, Sergeant. But if this goes sideways, if any of this threatens her in any way, General Patterson comes out of retirement permanently, and that won't be good for anyone involved." Coleman's eyes widened slightly at the steel in my voice, recognition dawning of the woman who'd earned her reputation in places where failure meant body bags and international incidents. "Understood, ma'am. Completely understood." As I walked back to my Honda, leaving Coleman to his phone calls and official channels, I felt something shifting inside me that had been dormant for 8 years. The comfortable weight of command, the clarity that came with having a mission, and the authority to complete it. For better or worse, Sarah Mitchell's quiet life was over. The only question now was what would take its place. The drive back to Pearson's took me through familiar streets that suddenly felt foreign, as if the revelation of my true identity had shifted the lens through which I saw the world. Every car behind me was a potential tale, every pedestrian a possible threat, every routine traffic pattern something that needed analysis and response. The hypervigilance I'd spent years suppressing was flooding back like muscle memory, and I realized how much effort it had taken to maintain Sarah Mitchell's oblivious suburban existence. Derek was restocking the jewelry counter when I walked through the employee entrance, his young face lighting up with a kind of genuine enthusiasm that made him a natural at retail. He glanced at his watch with mock concern, noting that I was 15 minutes late returning from lunch. "Let me guess," he said with a grin. The Honda finally gave up and you had to push it the last 3 blocks? Something like that, I replied, forcing the easy smile that Sarah Mitchell would have worn. Sorry about the delay. Traffic was heavier than expected. But even as I fell back into the familiar rhythms of customer service, part of my mind was running through contingencies and threat assessments with the systematic thoroughness that had kept me alive in places where mistakes had permanent consequences. Coleman would be making his calls, accessing databases and official channels that would either confirm my story or raise questions I wasn't prepared to answer. Either way, the comfortable anonymity I'd maintained for 8 years was gone forever. The afternoon passed slowly, each customer interaction requiring conscious effort to maintain the persona I'd crafted so carefully. Mrs. Henderson returned looking for a scarf to match a dress she'd bought the previous week, and I found myself studying her more closely than usual, noting the way she moved, the careful precision of her speech, the quality of her accessories that suggested more resources than a retail customer might typically possess. Paranoia, probably, but in my experience, the line between paranoia and preparation was measured in heartbeats and split-second decisions. At 3:30, my phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Debate team tryouts went great. Staying late to celebrate with the team. Home by 6:30. Can we order pizza tonight? The normalcy of the message felt surreal against the backdrop of everything that had changed since morning. But it also reminded me what was at stake. Whatever Coleman discovered, whatever official attention my blown cover might attract, Emma's world needed to remain stable and secure. I was helping a customer find the right size in a summer dress when I noticed him again. The same man from yesterday, browsing the men's section with the same careful attention that had nothing to do with shopping and everything to do with surveillance. This time, however, he wasn't alone. Outside, Coleman had arranged for an unmarked car to provide escort, complete with a kind of defensive driving protocols that suggested he took my security seriously. "Derek," I said as we reached the parking lot, "I need you to do me a favor. Take the rest of the day off. Go home, and don't discuss what happened here with anyone until I can explain things properly." "Sarah, what is going on? Who are you really?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, heavy with implications I wasn't ready to address. But Derek deserved something approaching honesty, especially after showing the kind of courage that had put him in harm's way. I used to have a different job, one that made some people unhappy. I changed my life to keep my daughter safe, but sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. I met his eyes, hoping he could see the sincerity behind the incomplete explanation. "I'm still the same person who trained you on the register and helped you with difficult customers. The rest is just complicated." He nodded slowly, still processing but accepting the limitations of what I could tell him. "Are you going to be okay? Is Emma going to be okay?" "Yes," I said with more confidence than I felt, "but I need to go take care of her now." The drive to Millbrook Academy passed in a blur of residential streets and tactical radio chatter from the escort vehicle. Coleman had arranged for a command post in the school's administrative office, complete with secure communications and a perimeter that would prevent any unwanted visitors from getting close to Emma. Professional, thorough, and exactly the kind of protection detail I would have requested if I'd still been wearing a uniform. Emma was waiting in the principal's office when I arrived, her face pale but composed in the way that made me proud of her resilience, even as it broke my heart that she needed to use it. She looked up as I entered, relief flooding her features as she jumped up to hug me with the fierce intensity of someone who'd been truly frightened. "Mom, what's happening?" "The police said there might be people looking for you, and they needed to make sure I was safe." "Are we in danger?" I held her tight, feeling the familiar weight of choices made and prices paid. For 8 years, I'd managed to shield her from the consequences of my previous life, creating a bubble of normalcy that had allowed her to grow up thinking the world was a place where the biggest problems involved homework and teenage social dynamics. That illusion was gone now, shattered by circumstances beyond my control. "Sweetheart, we need to talk. About who I used to be, and why some people might want to find me." I guided her to a chair, sitting across from her with the careful positioning of someone about to deliver life-changing news. "But first, I need you to know that you're safe, and that everything I've done has been to protect you." Emma's eyes were wide but steady, her intelligence already working through implications and possibilities. "You weren't just in the army, were you? You did something important. Something dangerous." "Yes." and Daddy's death wasn't an accident. The perceptiveness of her question hit me like a physical blow. Emma had always been too smart for her own good, able to see patterns and connections that adults tried to hide. I'd known this conversation would come eventually, but I'd hoped for more time, more preparation, more control over the circumstances. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. They say you can judge a person by their car. If that's true, then I must be a walking disaster. My 1998 Honda Civic, with its rust-stained bumper, duct-taped side mirror, and the perpetual symphony of rattles and squeaks that accompanied every mile, painted a pretty clear picture to the world. Single mom struggling to make ends meet. Someone who shopped at thrift stores and clipped coupons. The kind of woman you'd pass in the grocery store without a second glance, maybe even feel a little sorry for. And honestly, for the past 8 years, that's exactly who I wanted them to see. Because the truth about who I really was, what I'd done, and the weight I carried every single day, was something I'd buried so deep that even I sometimes forgot it existed. Until that humid Tuesday morning, when a routine traffic stop in the suburbs of Millbrook would strip away every carefully constructed layer of my new identity and remind me that some things you can never truly leave behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm clock's shrill cry cut through my dreams at exactly 5:30 a.m., same as it had every weekday for the past 3 years. I rolled over in my narrow twin bed, feeling the familiar protest of springs that had given up their fight against gravity long ago. The apartment was quiet, except for the steady breathing coming from the room next door, where my daughter Emma was still lost in whatever peaceful world 13-year-olds escaped to when sleep claimed them. At least one of us was getting rest. I padded to the kitchen in bare feet, the linoleum cold against my skin despite the August heat that was already building outside. The coffee maker, a wedding gift from a lifetime ago that had somehow survived everything else, gurgled to life as I measured out grounds with the precision of someone who'd learned that every penny counted. Through the thin walls, I could hear Mrs. Chen getting ready for her shift at the hospital, her footsteps a familiar rhythm that marked the beginning of another day in our modest complex. The woman staring back at me from the bathroom mirror looked every bit the part I'd been playing for 8 years. Sarah Mitchell, divorced mom of 1, working 2 jobs to keep food on the table and the lights on. The gray threading through my dark hair was real enough, earned through sleepless nights and the kind of stress that aged you from the inside out. The lines around my eyes spoke of exhaustion, worry, and the constant juggling act that was my life. What they didn't show was the discipline that kept my posture ramrod straight even when I was slouching on purpose, or the way my eyes automatically cataloged exit routes and potential threats even in the safety of my own bathroom. I dressed quickly in the uniform that had become my second skin over the past few years. Khaki pants with permanent creases from too many trips through the industrial washers at the laundromat, a polo shirt in that particular shade of blue that screamed service industry, and comfortable shoes that could handle 12-hour shifts without complaint. The name tag pinned to my chest read Sarah in cheerful block letters, positioned precisely 2 finger widths above my left shirt pocket. Old habits died hard, even when you were trying to kill them. Emma was stirring as I peeked into her room, her wild curls creating a halo around her face that reminded me so much of myself at that age, it sometimes took my breath away. She had her father's eyes, though, that warm brown that could melt your heart or see right through your soul depending on her mood. At 13, she was caught between wanting to be treated like an adult and needing the security of childhood. A balance I struggled with daily. "Morning, sweetheart," I whispered, setting her uniform on the chair beside her bed. 20 minutes until we need to leave." She mumbled something that might have been acknowledgement and burrowed deeper into her pillow. I smiled despite the knot of anxiety that had taken up permanent residence in my chest. Emma was everything good in my world, the one pure thing that had come out of the wreckage of my previous life. She knew I'd been in the military, of course, but I'd painted it in broad, sanitized strokes. A desk job, administrative work. Nothing that would give her nightmares or make her ask the kinds of questions I wasn't ready to answer. The Honda was waiting in its assigned spot outside our building, looking like every other beat-up car in the complex's parking lot. I'd bought it 3 years ago from a guy who'd been honest about its problems, and it had been limping along ever since through a combination of prayer, basic maintenance, and the kind of mechanical stubbornness that seemed to afflict vehicles that had been loved too hard and too long. The driver's side door required a specific combination of pulling and lifting to open properly, and the air conditioning had given up the ghost sometime during the previous summer. Emma climbed into the passenger seat with the dramatic sigh that seemed to be standard equipment for teenagers everywhere. She was dressed in her school uniform, the burgundy and gold of Millbrook Academy crisp, despite our budget constraints. I'd fought hard to get her into that school, working extra shifts and cutting every corner imaginable to afford the tuition. She was brilliant, my daughter, with a mind that could dissect complex problems and a heart that still believed the world was fundamentally good. I intended to keep it that way. "Mom, can we talk about the car situation again?" she asked, as I coaxed the engine to life with the particular combination of key turning and gas pedal pressure it required. "What about it?" "Well, Jessica's mom drives a Range Rover, and Madison's family just got a Tesla, and here we are in—" She gestured at the dashboard, where several warning lights had taken up permanent residence. This. I felt the familiar pang of guilt that came with knowing I could have provided more, could have given her the life her classmates took for granted. The money was there, locked away in accounts I'd sworn never to touch, earned in places and ways that belonged to a different version of myself. But that money came with a price I wasn't willing to pay, connections to a world I'd left behind, for reasons that still woke me up in cold sweats. "This car has character," I said, turning onto Maple Street with a grinding sound that suggested the transmission was contemplating retirement. "Besides, it gets us where we need to go." "Barely," Emma muttered, but she was smiling now. "Remember when it broke down outside the mall last month, and that guy in the tow truck asked if we needed him to call a scrapyard?" "He was being helpful," I said, though I remembered wanting to show him exactly what I thought of his suggestion in ways that would have required medical attention. "And we made it home, didn't we?" The morning routine was comfortingly predictable. Drop Emma at school, exchange pleasantries with the other parents who'd learned to be polite but distant with the single mom who worked retail, then navigate the increasingly congested streets to my job at Pearson's department store. It was honest work, helping customers find what they needed, processing returns, and pretending that folding clothes was a skill that required years of training. My manager, Derek, was a good kid in his 20s, who treated me with the kind of respectful patience usually reserved for elderly relatives. The store opened at 9, and I was always there 15 minutes early, not because corporate required it, but because punctuality had been drilled into me until it became involuntary. I unlocked the doors, disabled the alarm system, and began the opening checklist that would prepare us for another day of suburban commerce. The familiar rituals were soothing in their predictability, a stark contrast to mornings that had once begun with mission briefings and tactical assessments. Mrs. Henderson was my first customer, as she was most Tuesdays. She was in her 70s, impeccably dressed, and had the kind of old money bearing that made you instinctively straighten your posture. She shopped slowly and deliberately, examining every item with the attention usually reserved for fine art. I'd learned over the months that she was actually lonely, that these shopping trips were as much about human contact as they were about acquiring new scarves. "Good morning, Mrs. Henderson," I said, genuinely pleased to see her. "How was your weekend?" "Oh, you know how it is, dear. Too quiet for my taste. My grandson was supposed to visit, but you know how young people are these days. Always so busy." She paused at a display of summer blouses, running her fingers over the fabric with practiced assessment. "How's your daughter doing in school?" "She's doing wonderfully. Thank you for asking. Just started her freshman year, and she's already talking about which colleges she wants to visit." Mrs. Henderson's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "That's wonderful. Education is so important. My late husband always said that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take away from you." I nodded, thinking about all the knowledge I carried that I desperately wished someone could take away. Technical manuals memorized, tactical procedures that played in my head like old songs, and the kind of split-second decision-making skills that had kept me alive in places where mistakes measured their consequences in body bags. Not exactly the type of education Mrs. Henderson had in mind. The morning passed in its usual rhythm of customer service and inventory management. I helped a young mother find clothes for her toddler, processed returns for a man who'd clearly been sent by his wife with detailed instructions, and assisted Derek with a complicated exchange that required manager override. It was peaceful work, the kind that let my mind wander while my hands stayed busy. During my lunch break, I sat in the employee break room, eating a sandwich I'd packed from home and reading a paperback novel I'd picked up at the library. The book was a romance, something light and predictable that required no emotional investment. I'd learned to avoid anything that dealt with military themes or international conflict. Those stories hit too close to home, stirring up memories I'd worked hard to bury. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. Staying after school for math tutoring. Home by 5. Love you. I smiled, despite the slight worry that always accompanied any change in routine. She was responsible beyond her years, another trait that reminded me of myself at that age, though her discipline came from naturally wanting to excel rather than from necessity and survival. The afternoon brought the usual parade of customers, preparing for back-to-school shopping, summer clearance hunters, and the occasional difficult customer who seemed to believe that raising their voice would somehow bend reality to their will. I handled each interaction with the same professional courtesy, drawing on reserves of patience that had been tested in far more challenging circumstances than someone complaining about return policies. It was just after 3 when I noticed him. He'd been browsing the men's section for 20 minutes, but his attention wasn't really on the clothes. Instead, he kept glancing in my direction with the kind of focused observation that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. He was in his 40s, well-dressed but not expensively so, with the kind of haircut that suggested military background. More concerning was the way he moved, the casual alertness that I recognized, because I saw it in my own reflection when I wasn't being careful. I continued helping customers while keeping him in my peripheral vision, noting the way he positioned himself to maintain clear sight lines, and how his right hand rested at his side in a position that would allow quick access to a concealed weapon. It could have been paranoia, the kind of hypervigilance that had taken years to dial down to manageable levels. But it could also have been exactly what it looked like, and in my experience, it was better to be wrong about nothing than wrong about something. When he finally approached my counter, I maintained the same pleasant customer service expression I wore for everyone else, but every nerve in my body was firing warning signals. "Excuse me," he said, his voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who'd spent years shouting over aircraft engines. "I'm looking for something for my wife." "Maybe you could help me?" "Of course," I replied, keeping my tone light and helpful. "What did you have in mind?" "Something special. She's been through a lot lately, and I wanted to get her something that would remind her that she's appreciated." His eyes never left my face as he spoke, searching for something I wasn't about to give him. "That's very thoughtful. Did you have a particular style in mind, or maybe a color preference?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Actually, I think she'd like something in desert tan. She always had a thing for that color. Said it reminded her of places she'd been, people she'd served with." The words hit me like ice water in my veins, but I kept my expression neutral. Desert tan wasn't a color you typically found in women's fashion, unless you knew where to look and what it signified. He was fishing, seeing if I'd react to the reference, testing whether his suspicions were correct. "I'm not sure we carry that particular shade," I said carefully. "Most of our summer collection is focused on brighter colors this season. Maybe I could show you some alternatives?" "No, that's all right. I think I'll keep looking." He paused, studying my face one more time. "You know, you remind me of someone I used to know. Someone who disappeared a few years back. Had to leave everything behind for family reasons." My heart was pounding now, but I maintained the bland smile of someone who had no idea what he was talking about. "I get that a lot. One of those faces, I guess." He nodded slowly, then turned and walked away without another word. I watched him leave through the main entrance, noting the way he paused to scan the parking lot before getting into a dark sedan with government plates. My hands were shaking slightly as I processed what had just happened. The careful dance of recognition and denial that could have gone very differently if I'd given him what he was looking for. The rest of my shift passed in a blur of routine tasks performed on autopilot, while my mind raced through possibilities and contingencies. Someone had found me, or at least suspected they had. The question was whether it was official business or something more personal, and whether this was an isolated incident or the beginning of something larger. I'd known this day might come eventually, but I'd hoped for more time, more distance between who I used to be and who I was trying to become. At 5:30, I clocked out and made my way to the parking lot with the same casual pace I always used. But my senses were hyper-tuned to everything around me. The sedan was gone, but that didn't mean I wasn't being watched. I started the Honda with its usual protests and pulled out into traffic, taking a route home that included several unnecessary turns and lane changes designed to reveal any tail. Emma was waiting for me when I got home, sprawled across the couch with her textbooks spread around her like a paper fortress. She looked up as I came through the door, her face bright with the kind of enthusiasm that made my chest tight with love and protectiveness. "Mom! You'll never guess what happened in math today. Mr. Patterson said I had the highest score on the placement test, and he wants me to consider skipping ahead to advanced algebra next semester." I set down my purse and keys with deliberate calm, even though my mind was still processing threat assessments and escape routes. This was what mattered now. This brilliant, beautiful girl who trusted me to keep her world safe and stable. Whatever was coming, whoever had found me, Emma came first. She always came first. "That's amazing, sweetheart. Tell me everything." As she launched into an animated description of her academic triumph, I settled beside her on the couch and let her excitement wash over me like a balm. For these few minutes, I could be just Sarah Mitchell again. Proud mom celebrating her daughter's success. The weight of everything else could wait until Emma was asleep, until I could sit in the darkness and plan for whatever storm might be approaching. But even as I smiled and asked questions and marveled at her intelligence, a part of my mind was already shifting into a different mode, dusting off skills and instincts I'd hoped never to need again. Because if someone had found Sarah Mitchell, it meant they were also looking for the woman she used to be. And that woman had enemies who didn't believe in leaving loose ends untied. The evening routine proceeded normally on the surface. Dinner from ingredients that had been carefully budgeted, homework supervision that really meant keeping Emma company while she tackled problems that were rapidly approaching the limits of my rusty mathematical knowledge, and the usual negotiations about screen time and bedtime that were part of parenting a teenager. But underneath the domestic normalcy, I was running through mental checklists and contingency plans that belonged to a different life entirely. After Emma went to bed, I sat at our small kitchen table with a cup of tea cooling in front of me, staring out the window at the parking lot where my pathetic Honda sat under a flickering streetlight. Tomorrow, I'd have to make some decisions about how much of my carefully constructed life I was willing to risk to protect what really mattered. Because one thing I'd learned in all my years of service was that running only worked until it didn't, and when that day came, you'd better be ready to fight. Wednesday morning dawned gray and humid, the kind of weather that made clothes stick to your skin before you'd even stepped outside. I'd slept fitfully, my dreams filled with fragments of memories I'd spent years trying to suppress. Desert landscapes bleeding into suburban streets, the sound of helicopter rotors mixing with the familiar hum of our ancient air conditioning unit. I woke feeling like I'd run a marathon, my body remembering tensions I'd trained it to forget. Emma was unusually quiet over breakfast, picking at her cereal while scrolling through her phone with the intense concentration teenagers reserved for social media updates that would be forgotten by lunch. I studied her face, looking for any sign that my anxiety from the previous day had transmitted itself to her, but she seemed lost in her own world of teenage concerns. "Everything okay, sweetheart?" I asked, refilling my coffee mug with hands that were steadier than they had any right to be. "Yeah, just tired." Jessica's having drama with her boyfriend again and kept texting me until like midnight. She looked up with a slight smile. "Sometimes I think being 13 is more exhausting than whatever you did in the army." If only she knew. I returned her smile, pushing down the familiar weight of secrets that sat between us like an invisible wall. High school social dynamics are definitely their own kind of warfare. The drive to Millbrook Academy followed our usual route through the tree-lined streets of our suburban neighborhood. Houses sat back from the road behind manicured lawns, their windows glowing with the warm light of families beginning their day. It was the kind of community I'd dreamed about during deployments, the embodiment of everything I'd convinced myself I was fighting to protect. Now that I lived here, the normalcy felt both precious and fragile, like something that could shatter if you held it too tightly. Emma chatted about her plans for the day, something about a group project in history class and tryouts for the debate team that afternoon. I found myself memorizing the details with unusual intensity, storing up these ordinary moments like a soldier hoarding rations. The man from yesterday had shaken something loose in my carefully constructed world, a reminder that the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. "Mom, you're doing that thing again," Emma said as we pulled into the school's circular drive. "What thing?" "That thing where you look like you're planning a military operation instead of just dropping me off at school." She leaned over to kiss my cheek, her voice gentle with the kind of perception that made my chest tight. "Whatever's bothering you, it'll be okay. You're basically unstoppable when you put your mind to something." I watched her walk toward the main entrance, her backpack bouncing against her shoulders as she joined the stream of students filtering through the doors. She turned to wave before disappearing inside, and I felt the familiar mixture of pride and terror that came with loving someone more than your own life. If my past caught up with me, she'd be the one who paid the price. The morning commute to work took me through downtown Millbrook, past the courthouse and the small business district, where shop owners were rolling up their security gates and setting out sidewalk signs. Traffic was heavier than usual, some kind of construction project funneling 3 lanes into one just past the library. I found myself trapped behind a massive SUV with tinted windows, my Honda's engine straining to maintain the stop-and-go pace that seemed designed to test the limits of aging transmissions. That's when I noticed the police car in my rearview mirror. Officer Martinez had been sitting at the intersection of Oak and 3rd Street, partially hidden behind a bus stop advertisement for a local dentist. I'd spotted him as I'd turned onto Oak, my eyes automatically cataloging the patrol car's position and the way the officer was positioned to observe traffic patterns. It was the kind of habitual surveillance awareness that had kept me alive in hostile territory, but here in suburban Virginia, it just made me paranoid. He'd fallen in behind me at the next light, maintaining a careful distance that suggested professional interest rather than random positioning. My pulse quickened slightly as I ran through possible reasons for police attention. Registration was current, inspection was up to date, and I'd been driving 5 miles under the speed limit because the Honda speedometer had developed an optimistic relationship with reality. The construction zone ahead was marked with orange cones and workers in bright vests, reducing traffic to a crawl that gave me too much time to think. In my peripheral vision, I could see Officer Martinez speaking into his radio, his body language suggesting he was running plates or requesting backup. Neither possibility filled me with confidence. I forced myself to maintain normal driving behavior, hands at 10 and 2. Eyes on the traffic ahead, radio turned to the classical station that Emma insisted made me seem like a more sophisticated parent. But underneath the facade of suburban normalcy, older instincts were kicking in. I was calculating distances to potential cover, identifying alternate routes, and running through the contents of my purse for anything that might be problematic if searched. The traffic light ahead turned red, just as the SUV in front of me cleared the intersection, leaving me stopped directly in the construction zone with nowhere to go. Officer Martinez pulled up alongside me in the left lane, close enough that I could see him clearly through his passenger window. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of military bearing that suggested prior service. His uniform was crisp despite the humidity, and his equipment was positioned with the precision of someone who'd learned that details mattered in dangerous situations. He was looking directly at me now, his expression serious as he spoke into his radio again. I kept my eyes forward, but I could feel his attention like a physical weight. Something about my license plate or my appearance had triggered his interest, and the professional part of my brain was already running through scenarios and responses. The light turned green and traffic began moving again at the glacial pace dictated by the construction zone. Officer Martinez dropped back behind me, maintaining the same careful distance that suggested I was now officially a person of interest. My hands tightened on the steering wheel as I navigated through the orange cones, acutely aware that any sudden movement or driving error would provide justification for a stop. The construction zone ended just past the municipal building, and traffic began to spread out again. I merged into the right lane with careful precision, signaling well in advance and checking my mirrors with the exaggerated care of someone who knew they were being watched. Officer Martinez stayed behind me, his presence a constant pressure that made my shoulders tense with remembered stress. I was 3 blocks from Pearson's when he activated his emergency lights. The familiar flash of red and blue in my rearview mirror triggered a cascade of responses that had nothing to do with suburban traffic stops, and everything to do with checkpoints and roadblocks in places where being pulled over could mean a lot more than a ticket. My breathing deepened automatically, my heart rate slowing as training kicked in. I signaled and pulled into the parking lot of a small strip mall, positioning the Honda between two larger vehicles in a spot that would provide some concealment from the street. Officer Martinez approached from the driver's side, his hand resting casually on his service weapon in the universal gesture of police officers everywhere. I rolled down my window with the manual crank that served as a constant reminder of my car's vintage, keeping my hands visible on the steering wheel as he approached. "Good morning, ma'am. License and registration, please." His voice was professionally neutral, but I caught the slight tightness around his eyes that suggested this wasn't a routine traffic stop. I reached slowly for my purse, narrating my movements out of ingrained habit. I'm reaching for my purse on the passenger seat. My license is in my wallet, and the registration should be in the glove compartment. "Take your time," he said, but his posture suggested he was anything but relaxed. I handed over the documents that identified me as Sarah Elena Mitchell, divorced mother of one, retail employee, and absolutely nobody worth a second glance. The license photo showed a woman who looked tired and stressed, the kind of person who worked 2 jobs and worried about making rent. It was a perfect disguise, crafted with the same attention to detail I'd once applied to infiltration operations in countries that didn't officially exist on any mission reports. Officer Martinez studied the license for longer than was strictly necessary, comparing the photo to my face with the thoroughness of someone who'd been trained to spot discrepancies. He walked back to his patrol car, license in hand, and I could see him speaking into his radio again while running my information through whatever databases were available to local law enforcement. The wait stretched on longer than it should have for a simple traffic stop. Through my side mirror, I could see Martinez's body language becoming more animated as he spoke to whoever was on the other end of his radio conversation. He pulled out a tablet, typing something with the kind of focused intensity that made my mouth go dry. When he returned to my window, everything about his demeanor had changed. The casual authority of a patrol officer had been replaced by something harder, more focused. His hand wasn't just resting on his weapon anymore. It was positioned for a fast draw, and his eyes held a recognition that made my blood turn to ice. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." "Is there a problem, officer?" I kept my voice level, projecting the mild confusion of someone who'd never been in trouble with the law. "Please step out of the vehicle and keep your hands where I can see them." The please was a formality, and we both knew it. I complied slowly, moving with deliberate care to avoid any action that might be misinterpreted as threatening. The humid air hit me like a wall as I stood beside my car, hands visible and non-threatening, while Martinez positioned himself at a tactical angle that would give him the advantage in any confrontation. "Turn around and place your hands on the roof of the vehicle." This was moving beyond a traffic stop into something that required immediate decisions about how much resistance was appropriate for Sarah Mitchell, suburban mom. I turned and placed my palms flat against the Honda's sun-baked roof, feeling the heat through my fingertips while Martinez approached from behind. "Ma'am, you're not in any trouble, but I need to verify some information. Are you carrying any weapons or anything else I should know about?" "No weapons," I said truthfully. Sarah Mitchell didn't carry weapons. The woman I used to be would never have been caught unarmed, but that person was supposed to be dead and buried under 8 years of carefully constructed normalcy. Martinez conducted a professional but thorough pat-down, his movements efficient and impersonal. He found my cell phone, keys, and wallet, setting them on the roof beside my hands before stepping back to a safe distance. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to remain exactly where you are while I make a phone call. Don't move unless I tell you to." He walked back to his patrol car, speaking urgently into his radio while keeping me in sight. I could hear fragments of his conversation carried on the humid air, technical terms and codes that meant nothing to a civilian, but everything to someone with my background. He was requesting backup, but not the kind needed for a traffic violation. This was the kind of backup you called when you'd stumbled across something bigger than your pay grade. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. My arms were starting to ache from maintaining position against the car, and sweat was beginning to bead on my forehead despite the adrenaline that was keeping my core temperature down. Other cars passed by on the street, their occupants rubbernecking at the scene of what appeared to be a routine traffic stop but feeling different in ways they couldn't quite identify. That's when the second patrol car arrived, followed almost immediately by a third. The officers who emerged moved with the kind of coordinated precision that spoke of training beyond local law enforcement. They positioned themselves around my Honda in a loose perimeter, creating fields of fire that would contain any threat while minimizing risk to bystanders. Martinez approached again, but this time he wasn't alone. The sergeant who accompanied him was older, grayer, with the kind of bearing that suggested he'd seen action in places that didn't make the evening news. His uniform bore ribbons that I recognized, campaign medals from conflicts I'd participated in from a very different perspective. "Ma'am," the sergeant said, his voice carrying an authority that made Martinez look like a rookie. "I'm Sergeant Coleman, and I think we need to have a conversation." "About what?" I maintained the confused innocence of someone who had no idea why 3 police cars were needed for a traffic stop. Coleman studied my face with the intensity of someone who'd learned to read people in life-or-death situations. "About who you really are, General." The word hit me like a physical blow, shattering the carefully constructed identity I'd built around myself. In that moment, Sarah Mitchell ceased to exist, and I felt the familiar weight of command settling back onto my shoulders like an old uniform that still fit perfectly. "I think you have me confused with someone else," I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I knew it was over. Whatever database they'd accessed, whatever recognition software had flagged my license photo, the game was up. Coleman shook his head slowly. "General Elena Patterson, formerly commanding officer of Joint Task Force 47, recipient of the Defense Distinguished Service Medal, the Silver Star, and about a dozen other decorations that are probably still classified." He paused, letting the weight of recognition settle between us. "Ma'am, what are you doing driving a 25-year-old Honda and working retail in Millbrook, Virginia?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a battlefield, heavy with implications and consequences I'd spent 8 years trying to avoid. Around us, the other officers maintained their positions, but their body language had shifted. They were no longer containing a potential threat. They were providing security for someone whose presence had just rewritten their understanding of the situation. "Sergeant," I said quietly, feeling the familiar cadence of military bearing creeping back into my voice, "I think we need to discuss this somewhere more private." Coleman nodded, recognizing the tone of someone accustomed to giving orders that mattered. "No, sweetheart, it wasn't an accident." She was quiet for a long moment, processing information that would change how she understood her entire life. When she spoke again, her voice was steady but smaller than usual, the voice of someone confronting adult realities for the first time. "Are the people who killed Daddy coming for us now?" "Some people who work for them might have found us, yes, but we're going to make sure that stops being a problem." I reached over to take her hands, grounding both of us in the physical connection. "Emma, I need you to listen carefully. Your mother is someone who spent a lot of years making sure bad people couldn't hurt innocent families. That's what I did in the Army, and it's what I'm going to do now to keep you safe." "You're going to fight them?" "If I have to. But first, I'm going to make sure they understand that bothering us is a very bad idea for their health and career prospects." A small smile flickered across her face at that, recognition of the steel beneath the suburban mom exterior she'd known her entire life. "So you're like a secret agent or something?" "Something like that. More like a soldier who specialized in very complicated problems." Emma nodded slowly, working through the implications with the kind of methodical intelligence that reminded me why she was already talking about advanced placement classes. "Is that why we move every few years? Why you never talk about your family or where you grew up?" "Yes. And why I've always been so careful about our routines, our security, the people we let into our lives." I squeezed her hands gently. "I know this is a lot to process, and I know it changes how you see our life together. But I need you to know that every choice I've made has been about giving you the chance to grow up normal and safe." "But we can't do that anymore, can we? Now that they've found us?" The question cut straight to the heart of everything I'd been avoiding. Emma was right, of course. The careful anonymity that had protected us was gone, blown by a routine traffic stop and whatever intelligence networks had been searching for me over the past 8 years. We could run again, create new identities, and start over in another town. But the pattern would just repeat itself. Eventually, someone would always find us. "I don't know yet," I admitted, "but I'm going to make sure we have choices. Good choices, not just desperate ones." Coleman appeared in the doorway, his expression carefully neutral as he interrupted our conversation. "General, sorry to disturb, but we have some developments that require your attention." I stood, noting the formal mode of address that told me the situation had changed in ways that required my attention as a military officer rather than a concerned parent. "What kind of developments?" "The kind that suggest this situation is bigger than a simple location and elimination operation. We need to discuss some options that might provide long-term solutions rather than temporary fixes." Emma looked between us, her quick mind already picking up on the undercurrents of military protocol and tactical planning. "Mom, go do what you need to do. I'll be okay here." I studied her face, seeing the strength and resilience that had carried her through 8 years of abbreviated explanations and sudden relocations. She was scared, but she was also ready to face whatever came next with a kind of courage that made me proud and terrified in equal measure. "I'll be right back," I promised. "And Emma? Whatever else happens, you need to know that being your mom has been the greatest honor of my life." She smiled, tears threatening but not falling. "I love you too, Mom. Now go be whoever you used to be and fix this." Coleman led me to a secure conference room where a secure satellite phone and encrypted laptop provided connection to whatever official channels he'd been using to research my situation. The setup looked military-grade, which raised questions about how a local police sergeant had access to equipment that belonged in federal facilities. "Before you ask," he said, noting my assessment of the technology, "I called in some favors from my former unit. Turns out your reputation extends beyond official channels, and there are people in position who remember what you accomplished." He activated the laptop, displaying a file that contained more information about the past 8 years than I was comfortable seeing assembled in one place. Photos of Sarah Mitchell from various surveillance cameras, financial records showing the careful limitations of my constructed identity, and most disturbing, a timeline that tracked patterns in my movement and behavior with the kind of detail that suggested professional observation. "General, you've been under sporadic surveillance for most of the past 8 years. Not constant, but periodic checks to verify your location and assess your threat level." Coleman pointed to specific entries in the timeline. "Someone has been very patient, very careful, and very thorough in tracking your activities." "Who?" "That's where it gets interesting. The surveillance wasn't government, at least not officially. Private contractors working for what appears to be a consortium of defense industry interests who've been concerned about certain classified projects you were involved with during your active service." The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. My final assignment had involved oversight of weapons development and testing programs that existed in the gray areas between official military research and private sector innovation. The kind of work that generated enormous profits for the right companies and enormous liability for anyone who might testify about irregularities or ethical violations. "They're not trying to kill me," I said slowly. "They're trying to recruit me, or neutralize me as a potential witness. That's our assessment. The question is what you want to do about it." Coleman pulled up another file, this one containing official letterhead and what appeared to be reactivation orders. "Because there are people in very senior positions who would like to offer you an alternative to running and hiding." I stared at the documents, feeling the weight of choices that would determine not just my future but Emma's as well. Reactivation would mean returning to official status, government protection, and the kind of resources that could permanently solve the threat we faced. It would also mean giving up the quiet life I'd built, accepting the risks that came with high-level military service, and raising Emma in a world where her mother's job involved the kind of classified operations that made normal family life impossible. "What's the assignment?" Coleman smiled grimly. "Investigating and dismantling the same consortium that's been hunting you. Turns out they've been involved in activities that extend far beyond keeping track of former officers. Weapons trafficking, illegal technology transfers, and elimination of personnel who might interfere with their operations. Including my husband. Including your husband. General, this could be your chance to finish what started 8 years ago, with official backing and unlimited resources." He paused, studying my face. "But it would also mean giving up Sarah Mitchell permanently. No more quiet suburban life, no more anonymity, no more pretending to be ordinary." I thought about Emma, waiting in the principal's office for me to return with solutions to problems she was just beginning to understand. She'd grown up thinking her mother drove a beat-up Honda and folded clothes for a living, but she'd also grown up with the kind of security and stability that came from having a parent who would do anything to protect her. If I accept reactivation, what happens to my daughter? Full protection, education at the best schools money can buy, and the knowledge that her mother is serving her country in the highest traditions of military service. Coleman's voice softened slightly. General, she's already proud of you. This would just give her a reason to be proud that she could share with the world. Outside the conference room, I could hear the normal sounds of a school day winding down. Students and teachers going about their routines in blissful ignorance of the life-changing decisions being made in their administrative office. It was the kind of normalcy I'd fought to protect during my active service, and the kind of normalcy I'd tried to give Emma by disappearing into suburban anonymity. But Emma was right. We couldn't maintain that illusion anymore. The past had found us, and running would only delay the inevitable confrontation. The question was whether to face it as General Elena Patterson, with all the authority and resources that rank provided, or continue trying to handle it as Sarah Mitchell, suburban mom with limited options and no backup. I need to talk to my daughter, I said finally. This affects her as much as it affects me, and she deserves to have a voice in the decision. Coleman nodded approvingly. Take all the time you need, General. But for what it's worth, I think you've been hiding long enough. The world needs people like you in positions where they can make a difference, not folding clothes and worrying about rent money. I walked back to the principal's office, feeling the weight of 8 years shifting on my shoulders like an old uniform that no longer fit quite right. Emma looked up as I entered, her expression expectant and slightly worried, as if she could sense the magnitude of whatever decision I was facing. So, she said with the directness that had always been her trademark, are we running again? Or are you going back to being whoever you used to be? The question cut straight to the heart of everything, delivered with the kind of clarity that only came from someone too young to understand the complexity of adult compromises and too smart to be fooled by partial explanations. That depends, I said, sitting beside her with the careful positioning of someone about to negotiate terms that would affect both their lives. How would you feel about having a mom who wore a uniform to work and had a job that involved protecting people on a larger scale? Emma's eyes widened as she processed the implications. You mean like, officially? With the government backing you up instead of us hiding from everyone? Something like that. It would mean a very different life than what we've had. More security, better resources, but also more risks, and less privacy. And it would mean I'd travel sometimes for work. The kind of travel that might involve dangerous places and classified missions. She was quiet for a long moment, working through possibilities and consequences with the methodical thoroughness that made her such an excellent student. When she spoke, her voice carried a maturity that made my chest tight with pride and concern. Mom, I've spent my whole life watching you pretend to be someone you're not, working jobs that were beneath your capabilities, driving cars that should have been recycled years ago, living in apartments when we could probably afford better. She met my eyes with the kind of steady gaze that reminded me of myself at her age. If you have a chance to be who you really are, and to do work that matters, then I think you should take it. Even if it means your mom might be in danger sometimes, even if it means that, because the alternative is spending the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders, wondering when the next person is going to recognize you and turn our world upside down. Emma reached over to take my hand. Besides, I'd rather have a mom who's a general than a mom who's always scared. The words hit me like a revelation, confirming what I'd been afraid to admit even to myself. Emma had seen through the careful construct of Sarah Mitchell's limitations and fears, recognizing the cost of maintaining an identity that required constant vigilance and self-imposed restrictions. She wanted me to be strong, capable, and authentic, even if that meant accepting risks that came with power and responsibility. Are you sure? I asked. Because once I make this choice, there's no going back to the quiet life we've had. I'm sure. Her grip on my hand tightened slightly. And Mom? I want to know about Daddy. The real story. Not the version you've been telling me to protect my feelings. I felt something settle in my chest. A decision crystallizing with the kind of clarity that came when all the pieces finally aligned. Emma was ready for the truth. Ready for the challenges that came with being the daughter of someone whose work mattered on a national level. and I was ready to stop hiding from responsibilities I'd never really abandoned, just temporarily set aside. "Okay," I said, feeling the weight of General Elena Patterson settling back onto my shoulders like an old friend returning from a long journey. "Let's go change the world." When we emerged from the principal's office, Coleman was waiting with the kind of patient attention that suggested he'd known what my decision would be before I'd made it. Emma walked beside me with her chin up and her shoulders back, already adapting to the idea that her ordinary suburban life was about to become something much more interesting. "Sergeant," I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd set aside 8 years ago, "I accept reactivation under the terms discussed. When do we begin?" His smile was answer enough. 6 weeks after my reactivation, I stood in the secure conference room at Fort Belvoir, Virginia, watching as FBI agents led the last of the consortium members away in handcuffs. The operation had been swift, comprehensive, and devastating to an organization that had operated in the shadows for over a decade. Marcus Hoffman, the European contractor who'd approached me at Pearson's, was among those facing charges that would ensure he never saw freedom again. The irony wasn't lost on me that the same woman they'd hunted for 8 years had become their destroyer. General Elena Patterson, officially reinstated with a promotion to Major General and command of a joint task force specifically created to investigate defense contractor corruption, had resources they'd never imagined when they'd sent amateur surveillance teams to track a suburban retail worker. Emma sat in the visitor's chair beside my desk at the Pentagon, her new school uniform crisp and her laptop open to what appeared to be calculus homework that would have challenged most college students. At 14, she'd adapted to our new life with the same intelligence and resilience that had carried her through 8 years of careful anonymity. The exclusive military academy near our base in Northern Virginia provided the kind of education that matched her capabilities while maintaining the security protocols necessary for a general's family. "So that's really it?" she asked, looking up from her equations. "All the people who killed Dad are in custody?" "The operational team, yes. The financial backers, the corporate executives who authorized the elimination, and the government officials who provided classified information." I closed the thick folder containing the final investigation reports, feeling a weight lift from my shoulders that I'd carried for nearly a decade. Justice moves slowly sometimes, but it moves. Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing the conclusion of a story that had shaped her entire life without her knowledge. "What about the families of the other people they killed? The other soldiers, the whistleblowers, the investigators who got too close?" The question demonstrated the kind of moral clarity that made me proud of the young woman she was becoming. The consortium's activities had extended far beyond Michael's convoy, encompassing a network of elimination and intimidation that had claimed dozens of lives over the years. Each case was now being reviewed, families notified, and compensation arranged through channels that would provide closure without revealing classified details. "They're being taken care of," I assured her. "Your father wasn't the only good person who died because of corporate greed and political corruption. Making sure their families know the truth and receive the support they deserve is part of our mission now." The transition from Sarah Mitchell to Major General Patterson hadn't been without challenges. The first few weeks had required intensive briefings to bring me current on technological developments, personnel changes, and political shifts that had occurred during my absence from official service. The weapons programs I'd once overseen had evolved in directions that raised new ethical questions, while the private contractor relationships that had led to Michael's death had expanded into areas that threatened national security itself. My new command, Joint Task Force Phoenix, operated with the kind of broad authority that came from having congressional backing and presidential oversight. We investigated defense contractor fraud, eliminated corruption in military procurement, and ensured that the complex relationships between government and private industry served national interests rather than corporate profits. It was exactly the kind of work I'd been trained for, with resources that matched the scope of the problems we faced. Colonel Sarah Chen, my deputy commander and a former Army intelligence officer who'd served 2 tours in Afghanistan, knocked on my office doorframe before entering with the measured stride of someone comfortable with military protocol. In her mid-30s, with the kind of no-nonsense bearing that commanded respect regardless of rank, she'd become both a trusted subordinate and a close friend during the establishment of our task force. "General, we have the final sentencing results from the Hoffman case," she said, placing a sealed folder on my desk. 25 years to life, no possibility of parole. His testimony about the broader network operation sealed convictions for 6 additional defendants. I opened the folder, scanning the legal summary that represented the culmination of months of careful investigation and prosecution. Hoffman's cooperation had been motivated by the prospect of avoiding capital charges, and his detailed confession had revealed the full scope of the consortium's operations across 3 continents and multiple government agencies. "Any word on the asset recovery?" I asked, referring to the financial investigation that had frozen hundreds of millions in accounts connected to the consortium's operations. "Treasury is still working through the offshore structures, but preliminary estimates suggest we'll recover enough to fund victim compensation and establish a foundation for oversight of future contractor relationships." Chen's expression held the satisfaction of someone who'd spent years fighting corruption and finally seen justice prevail. "The Comptroller General estimates it's the largest recovery in defense fraud history." Emma looked up from her homework with the kind of interest that suggested she'd been following our conversation despite appearing focused on mathematics. "Mom, what happens to all that money? Like, do you get to decide how it's used?" "Some of it goes back to the Treasury to compensate taxpayers for fraudulent contracts. Some goes to families affected by the consortium's actions. And some funds new oversight programs to prevent similar corruption in the future." I gestured toward the folder. "Your father died trying to expose procurement fraud that was costing lives and undermining mission effectiveness. This recovery means his death contributed to reforms that will protect future soldiers." The afternoon briefing schedule included updates from 3 ongoing investigations, a congressional testimony preparation session, and a secure video conference with allied intelligence services who'd been tracking consortium activities in their own countries. The international scope of our work had revealed connections between American defense fraud and weapons trafficking networks that operated across multiple continents, requiring coordination with agencies I'd only heard about during my previous classified assignments. At 4:30, Derek Martinez called my direct line, a development that had become routine since our reconnection following the events at Pearson's department store. The young man who'd once been my retail supervisor had leveraged his business degree and natural leadership abilities into a position with the Department of Defense Contractor Oversight Office, where his fresh perspective and lack of institutional bias made him valuable in identifying irregularities that experienced auditors might miss. "General, I wanted to give you a heads up about something unusual in the Blackwater subsidiary contracts," he said, his voice carrying the professional confidence he'd developed over the months since leaving retail management. "We're seeing pattern anomalies that suggest someone might be trying to reconstitute consortium operations under different corporate structures." The news didn't surprise me, given the enormous profits at stake and the number of consortium members who'd escaped prosecution due to insufficient evidence or prosecutorial immunity agreements. "Send me the analysis when it's complete. If they're attempting to resume operations, we need to identify and neutralize them before they establish new networks." Derek's investigation had uncovered what appeared to be a systematic effort to rebuild the consortium's capabilities using shell companies and former employees who hadn't been directly implicated in the original prosecutions. The pattern suggested coordination and funding that implied someone with significant resources was determined to resume the profitable relationship between corporate interests and government corruption. "There's something else," Derek continued. "The financial flows we're tracking suggest this new organization has access to classified information about current military procurement. Someone on the inside is feeding them intelligence about upcoming contracts and oversight procedures." That revelation required immediate action. A leak within the defense procurement system could compromise not only our ongoing investigations but also national security operations that depended on secure contractor relationships. I made a note to request counterintelligence support from agencies with the authority and resources to identify and eliminate security breaches at the highest levels of government. Evening came early in November, and I found myself driving home through the Virginia suburbs in a government sedan that bore little resemblance to the ancient Honda that had defined Sarah Mitchell's transportation challenges. Emma rode beside me, her conversation bouncing between school projects and questions about military history that demonstrated her growing understanding of the world her mother operated in. "I've been thinking about what I want to study in college," she said as we turned into our new neighborhood, where each house sat behind security systems that monitored for threats more sophisticated than typical suburban crime. "International relations, maybe, or military history. Something that would let me understand the bigger picture of what you do." The statement filled me with pride and concern in equal measure. Emma's intelligence and moral clarity would make her valuable in fields related to national security and international affairs, but those same qualities could also make her a target for people who preferred their government activities conducted without public scrutiny or academic analysis. Those are excellent fields of study, I said carefully. But remember that you're not limited by what I do for work. Your talents could take you in any direction you choose, from scientific research to artistic expression to business leadership. I know that, but I also know that there are people in the world who do bad things to good people, and someone has to stop them. She looked out the window at the comfortable suburbia we now called home, seeing beyond the surface normalcy to the complex systems that maintained peace and prosperity. You and Dad dedicated your lives to that mission. Maybe it's something I inherited. Her words echoed conversations I'd had with my own father decades earlier, when military service was a family tradition rather than a personal choice. The Patterson family had served in every major American conflict since the Civil War, each generation finding their own way to contribute to the defense of democratic values and civilian safety. Emma represented the possibility of that tradition continuing, but also the hope that she might serve in a world where such service was less dangerous and more oriented toward prevention than response. Our new home reflected both the increased security requirements of my position and Emma's need for the kind of stable domestic environment that had been impossible during our years in hiding. The four-bedroom colonial sat on 2 acres of landscaped grounds surrounded by discreet but effective perimeter monitoring, while the interior combined comfortable family living with secure communications equipment that allowed me to maintain command authority regardless of my physical location. Emma disappeared upstairs to finish homework while I settled into my home office to review classified briefing materials for the next day's congressional testimony. The hearings on defense contractor oversight had drawn significant media attention, partly because of the dramatic nature of the consortium prosecutions, and partly because of my own unusual background, as a general who'd spent 8 years working retail to protect her family. The media attention had been one of the most challenging aspects of resuming public life. Sarah Mitchell's carefully constructed anonymity was gone forever, replaced by the kind of scrutiny that came with high-level military command and congressional oversight responsibilities. Reporters had tracked down former colleagues, customers from Pearson's, and even teachers from Emma's previous schools, constructing narratives about the hidden general who'd folded clothes and driven a beat-up Honda while planning her return to service. Most of the coverage had been respectful, focusing on themes of duty, sacrifice, and the complex challenges faced by military families. But some outlets had sensationalized the story, implying that my disappearance represented some kind of deception or abandonment of responsibility, rather than a carefully planned response to direct threats against my family's safety. The phone rang at 9:15, caller ID showing the secure line from my Pentagon office. Colonel Chen's voice carried the urgency of someone dealing with a situation that required immediate command attention. General, we have a development in the contractor leak investigation. NSA intercept suggests the information breach extends beyond procurement data. Someone with high-level clearances is providing classified operational intelligence to the reconstituted consortium. The news sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the November temperature outside. Operational intelligence could compromise ongoing missions, endanger military personnel, and provide hostile actors with advance warning of activities designed to protect American interests. If the new consortium had access to that level of classified information, they represented a threat to national security that extended far beyond procurement fraud. How current is the intelligence they're accessing? Current enough to adjust their own operations in real time. We're seeing pattern changes that suggest they know about our surveillance methods and investigative priorities. Chen's voice carried the frustration of someone watching adversaries stay one step ahead despite superior resources and legal authority. General, I think we need to consider the possibility that this leak originates from within our own task force or its oversight structure. The implication was devastating and entirely plausible. Joint Task Force Phoenix had been created rapidly in response to congressional pressure for accountability in defense contractor relationships, bringing together personnel from multiple agencies with varying security backgrounds and institutional loyalties. Someone with access to our methods and targets could easily provide advance warning to organizations seeking to evade investigation. Implement Protocol 7 effective immediately, I ordered, referring to the security review process that would subject all task force personnel to enhanced background investigations and polygraph examinations. And initiate Compartmentalized intelligence distribution. No one gets information beyond what they need for their specific assignments. Protocol 7 would be disruptive and demoralizing, implying that I suspected my own personnel of treasonous activity. But the alternative was allowing a security breach to continue compromising operations that affected both national security and the safety of military personnel whose lives depended on operational security. I hung up and sat in my office chair, staring out the window at the suburban normalcy that surrounded our home. Emma was upstairs working on homework that would prepare her for college and whatever career she chose to pursue, trusting that her mother's work made the world safer for people like her. The weight of that trust, combined with the responsibility to military personnel whose safety depended on my decisions, made the isolation of command feel heavier than it had during my previous assignments. The secure satellite phone in my desk drawer connected me to emergency communication networks that could reach anyone in the government or military hierarchy within minutes. But some decisions had to be made alone, by commanders who accepted responsibility for consequences they couldn't fully predict or control. 3 hours later, I'd reviewed personnel files for every member of Joint Task Force Phoenix, cross-referencing security clearances, financial records, and personal relationships that might indicate vulnerability to recruitment or compromise. The analysis revealed several individuals with access to the kind of intelligence the consortium appeared to possess, but no clear indicators of treasonous activity. Emma knocked on my office doorframe before entering with 2 mugs of hot chocolate, a tradition she'd established during our Sarah Mitchell years, when late-night worry sessions required comfort food and maternal attention. She'd grown perceptive about reading my moods, understanding when military responsibilities created stress that couldn't be shared or discussed. "Bad day at the office?" she asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the casual confidence of someone accustomed to sharing space with classified briefing materials and secure communication equipment. "Complicated day. Some problems require solutions that affect good people along with bad ones." I accepted the hot chocolate gratefully, feeling the familiar comfort of sharing quiet moments with the person who mattered most in my world. Sometimes command means making choices that hurt people you care about in order to protect people you're responsible for. Emma nodded thoughtfully, processing the abstract ethical dilemma with the kind of serious consideration that suggested she understood the weight of leadership decisions. Is that why Dad never talked much about his work? Because knowing too much about the hard choices would make it harder to make them. The question cut straight to the heart of military family dynamics, the careful balance between sharing enough truth to maintain trust and protecting loved ones from knowledge that might burden them with worry or moral complexity beyond their ability to process. Your father believed that some burdens belong to the people trained and authorized to carry them. He wanted you to grow up believing the world was fundamentally good, while he handled the parts that weren't. I met her eyes, seeing Michael's intelligence and compassion reflected in her expression. I've tried to do the same thing, but circumstances haven't always cooperated. I'm glad they didn't, Emma said quietly. I'm sorry about everything that happened to us, and I'm sorry we had to spend all those years hiding. But I'm proud of what you do, and I'm proud that I'm old enough now to understand why it matters. Her words carried the maturity of someone who'd grown up faster than I would have chosen, but maintained the essential optimism that made her childhood worth protecting. Emma had seen enough of the world's complexity to understand that freedom and safety required constant vigilance, but not so much that she'd lost faith in the possibility of justice and progress. At midnight, I finally closed the personnel files and locked the classified materials in the secure safe that occupied one corner of my home office. Tomorrow would bring congressional testimony, media interviews, and the ongoing investigation that would determine whether Joint Task Force Phoenix could maintain operational security while pursuing the reconstituted consortium. But tonight, I walked upstairs to check on Emma one more time before sleeping, finding her room dark and peaceful in the way that reminded me why I'd spent 8 years pretending to be someone else. She was safe, secure, and growing into the kind of young woman who would make positive contributions to whatever field she chose to enter. The woman who'd driven a beat-up Honda and worked retail to protect her daughter was gone forever, replaced by someone with the authority and resources to ensure that other families wouldn't face the threats we'd survived. General Elena Patterson had work to finish, justice to pursue, and a legacy to build that would honor both Michael's sacrifice and Emma's trust. Standing in my hallway looking out at the suburban community that surrounded our home, I felt the satisfaction of someone who'd finally stopped running from responsibility and started embracing it. The consortium was broken, their network dismantled, and their ability to threaten innocent families eliminated. New threats would emerge, requiring new responses and different strategies, but they would face an opponent with 8 years of motivation and unlimited official backing. 3 months after that traffic stop that changed everything, I was exactly where I belonged, protecting the people who couldn't protect themselves, serving the country that had given my family opportunities worth defending, and raising a daughter who understood that some things were worth fighting for. The Honda sat in our garage, a reminder of different times and different choices. Emma had suggested donating it to a charity that provided transportation for low-income families, turning a symbol of our former limitations into something that could help others overcome their own challenges. It seemed like a fitting end to Sarah Mitchell's story, and an appropriate beginning for whatever came next. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.